The system usability scale doesn't work for 15% of the population. Presented by Samuel Prue and Abid Virani. AliCamp 2021. We'd like to thank our gold sponsors Telstra and Intopia, our silver sponsors ANZ and Coles, and our bronze sponsor How2.
Hey everyone, Abid here from Fable.
And Sam Prue here from Fable.
We're really excited to be here today to have a chance to share with you all some of the work that we've been doing at Fable around making the internet better for folks who live with disabilities and use assistive tech. I'm Abid, one of the co-founders here at Fable, and have a background in inclusive design. And I'm really passionate about not just the outcome of what we're trying to achieve, a more accessible web, but equally as passionate about how we get there and the process in building that future state that we think could be better than it is right now. Sam, you want to do a bit of an intro?
Absolutely. I'm Sam. I'm the accessibility evangelist here at Fable. I myself am a completely blind screen reader user, have been blind from birth, as well as having the privilege of my father also being blind, who worked for IBM. So there's not a day I can ever remember that I wasn't around a talking computer and the assistive technology industry. And I've really gotten to see how this industry has progressed and changed over the last 30 years from kind of a very close-up view. And I'm really excited as a person with a disability here at Fable to be contributing to what I think is the next step on the path of ever improved accessibility and helping to kind of improve research methods and improve benchmarking methods.
Sam, before we dive into this, I always love when you say that talking computer, and I'm reminded of that quote around like how like technology advancements and this idea of it feeling like magic. I am actually just curious as we dive into this, as a young individual who's blind with a parent who's blind and being showed a thing that talks to you. Just did it feel like magic, or what was that initial experience for you?
I mean, the initial experience was just being very young. And hanging around my dad while he was working and hearing this sort of machine talk to him, and it's just being like, oh, well, that's what Dad does for work. He listens to the computer talk. But the real magical experience for me was the first time I encountered a scanner, and I was able to take a book of sort of printed words and just put it on the scanner, and within 30 seconds have what the actual web page contained read out to me. It was something that was the first I ever really encountered of like how completely liberating technology is going to be in the coming years.
How old were you, Sam? Like when you really started playing with a computer?
Oh boy. I mean, I started sort of using the computer before I really understood what it did when I was 3 or 4. You could type in words and have it read them aloud. But it was sort of when I got into 9 and 10 and started using it for school and started to realize that I could scan in all these books and read them, and I could actually print out an assignment for my teacher and not have to have like someone who read Braille like rewrite it for me in print so the teacher could mark it, and things like that, where I really started to have that impact. And then of course shortly thereafter got on the web, and just the world of interaction that opens up, because you're on an equal footing with everyone else, or should be, was really revolutionary. And I often say I spent most of my teenage years online, as I'm sure is a common experience for a lot of us.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Sam. Folks, today we're going to take some time to talk a little bit about assistive technology, including what Sam uses, the screen reader, but beyond that. And we're going to then talk a little bit about research methods, and we're gonna dive in specifically into the system usability scale, often referred to as SAS, and then our remix version of that, our iteration on that, called the accessible usability scale. And we'll explain why we did it, where it's at, what we're learning, and hopefully it's something that you can take away. But as I said, we'll start off with assistive technology. And why don't you kick us off there, Sam, and help frame what is this term, and what are we really talking about when people refer to it?
Absolutely. So, assistive technology is any kind of software or hardware that assists somebody in using a computer. And so there's multiple types of assistive technology that we work with here at Fable. One of them is, of course, the screen reader. And that is what I use. That is what folks who are completely blind or who don't have enough vision to sort of read print on a computer screen would use. Although I don't want to forget, it's also what many folks who are dyslexic and have other cognitive challenges that make it difficult for them to read print will also rely on. And so what a screen reader will do is it will just take the text from an application and interpret that text and read it out loud using synthetic speech, or it can also display it on a Braille display for those who have that hardware and who read Braille. We have a bit of a demo video of me using a screen reader. There's a couple of different types of screen readers. In the demo, I'm using JAWS, which is the leading commercial screen reader on Windows. But there's also NVDA, which is a free and open source screen reader that's kind of developed by blind users for users. And of course, on mobile, there's the Apple's VoiceOver screen reader, which they have built in for free both to their Macs and to their iPhones. And Google has its TalkBack screen reader as well.
Just before we dive into that demo, Sam, I think it's really interesting when you have a different versions of a technology. If you had to give an analogy of kind of screen readers are to folks who are blind or have low vision, dyslexia, like a comparison in the software space of how interchangeable these are.
Yeah, so in some ways, you can think of a screen reader like a browser. And that analogy actually works pretty well because if you think about your iPhone, Apple really, really, really wants you to use Safari, and you don't really change the browser or get much of a choice of browser. In the same way, the screen reader on iPhone is built in and works really well, and that's the screen reader that's integrated, and that's the screen reader that you get to use. Whereas on Windows, there are multiple competing screen readers in the same way that there is Chrome and Firefox that kind of target slightly different markets and slightly different purposes. So the JAWS screen reader JAWS is actually an acronym for Job Access with Speech. And so it's very focused on the employment market, on making sure that the software used by big enterprises and big corporations is accessible and is usable for those who are blind. And it doesn't focus as much on the things that the home user might use. Whereas NVDA, non-visual desktop access, because it's open source, isn't necessarily spending the time and energy on Matrix or on very complicated kind of database access software. It's more focused on things that home users in kind of a non-commercial setting will interact with and will use. And so you do get that choice depending on your needs and your philosophy. And people will often switch screen readers in the same way that people will switch browsers just to pick the best tool for their current need.
Cool. That's great. Really helpful to have kind of an analogy out there. Let's take a look at this video that you recorded for us.
What screen readers allow us to do is to jump directly to bits of content that we are interested in order to sort of replicate the visual experience of skimming a web page. And that's why accessibility and semantic layout and labeling is so critical. So I'm on the Google News homepage right now, and what I can actually do is I can tell the screen reader I want to navigate by heading level 2 with a special hotkey, and that will take me from one section to another. Headlines, Canada News, World News. I'm interested in what's going on in World News. So now I'll switch to navigating to heading level 3, because the heading structure that's been used allows me to know, oh, all the heading level 3s are going to be under World News, and I can get more details about what's going on in the world. And so instead of having to go through every single article, because the page has been well laid out and well structured, and because I am an expert user of the screen reader who has customized it to my needs, I'm able to go through a web page very, very quickly.
One of the things that I didn't go over in that little video, you probably noticed the voice was speaking extremely rapidly. That's not a problem with your sound or with the recording or something like that. It's intentional. I use a very robotic voice so that I can go, upwards to kind of 800 words per minute sometimes, because the voice is very robotic and very predictable. So the more you get used to it, the faster you can listen, and it really gives you that efficiency to match kind of sighted colleagues that a lot of us who are blind and who are expert screen reader users come to depend on.
Let's keep this moving and jump into screen magnification technology.
Absolutely.
What is it? How does it work?
So one thing that people kind of assume about disability is that it's a binary, right? Either you are blind or you are not blind. But of course, that's not the case. There are lots of people who still have sight and would still like to use their vision in order to use the computer. And so screen magnification software allows them to do that by compensating for vision challenges in a number of ways. It can magnify the screen up to like 800 times larger. It can change color contrast and the kind of foreground and background colors of the screen for folks who have problems with seeing certain types of colors. And it can do other things to help those who have vision problems, maybe who have trouble with bright colors, things like that, to be able to best see what's on the screen and to be able to use their computer. And there are, again, multiple different types of screen magnification software that are built into various operating systems, all of the mobile and desktop operating systems. But one of the more interesting pieces of software is called ZoomText Fusion. And what ZoomText Fusion is it's a full screen magnification software. It has the software ZoomText that does all of that magnification, but it also includes the JAWS software. So for somebody who is in the process of losing vision, or whose vision is good enough that they could look at the screen for short periods of time, they can then say, oh, I have a long piece of text that I need to read. I'm going to switch to the screen reader function and have it read to me so I don't have to use my eyes. And so depending on their situation and on the job that they're trying to do, because vision loss is something that happens gradually, and as everyone has different levels of vision, people will pick the best tool for their current job, whether it's magnifying the screen or reading the screen. And when we think about screen magnification, I think sometimes we think about it a little too narrowly. The number of people who have vision and are using pinch to zoom or are using the magnification built into their browsers just to see a little bit better, and yet will tell me, oh, well, I don't use any kind of assistive technology, is kind of surprising.
Yeah, that's a really nice framing. Let's dive into this demo while folks kind of have a second to think on that.
Hi, my name is Shane, and I'm a screen magnification user. At the moment, I am using the Windows built-in magnification, and I'm using it at the level 400. I also have the colors inverted, which means reversed, because it's easier on my eyes. Without doing that, I would, start getting headaches or fatigue in my eyes. So I need to do that for myself, as I'm a low vision user, or I have low vision. So I'm going to be reading through this website. I'm going to see what classes are available. So I'm going to start. So Able Yoga Studio. And I'm going to go and find the different courses that are available. I'm just kind of going back and forth on the page, so I try not to miss anything to find what I'm looking for. Our classes. So it's going to be here somewhere. So view class schedule, and this looks like it's the classes down here. So looks like one of the classes is Bikram Yoga, which has 26 poses in set cycles during a 90-minute class. There's also Ashtanga Yoga, a modern day form of classes, Indian Yoga, and Yin Yoga, which is deep tissue stretching, long passive holds. And I don't see any more yoga classes. So I'm going to end this and thank you.
Cool. Neat simple demo where using that, I think you mentioned 400 was kind of the level he had it at. And I think that's 400%. And then we had, some color inversion in there as well. Features that definitely have their mainstream applications as well. As we keep this moving, we have what we describe as alternative navigation. Now, this is a term that we use a lot at Fable, and it is an umbrella term to try to capture a mix of things. Sam, do you want to dive in a little bit here?
Absolutely. So alternative navigation is a term that we use a lot at Fable as an umbrella because we find it a very useful term to group a set of technologies that those who have any kind of physical challenge will use in order to replace the standard keyboard and mouse. And so that can, of course, involve quite a number of different types of technologies. You have things like Dragon Naturally Speaking, which are voice control software. So those who are controlling the computer entirely with their voice because they may be unable to type on a standard keyboard. You have one-handed keyboards for those who cannot operate a keyboard and mouse combination with two hands. You have the head mouse for those who can perhaps only use their head, so it can track based on the position of their head the position of the mouse. And you have things like switch systems, which the go-to example is if you think about Stephen Hawking in his later life. He could only use one muscle in his cheek, and by doing that he was able to use a switch system that allowed him to control the entire computer. And so we've got a little bit of a demo here of somebody using a head mouse. And as we get into that, kind of one of the interesting things that we find about alternative navigation users, again, is that they will use the best tool for the job. So some folks will find that, they can type a little bit, but their hands get very, very tired. So they'll use Dragon Naturally Speaking when they have to enter long periods of text. Some folks will find that they find speaking very difficult. So they'll use a switch system, except in some situations where speaking, to a voice control system might work better for them. And really, I think that's a common theme across technologies. We think of folks, they use this technology and this one technology at all times, but people really do pick and choose the tools that are best for the job based on their own lived experience.
Great, I'll just go ahead and hit play over here.
So what I'll do is a little demonstration. I like to set everything up so it's out of the way because these mouse icons do sort of block some of the screen. So I'm constantly moving them around. And you can see that this is the click and drag. So I'm moving my head back and forth and it's moving the little item back and forth as well. So here we go using the head mouse with the on-screen switches. You just have to hover. You do have to keep your head very still. So if a table has a bit of vibration to it, if it's got other technology on it, I have to sort of make arrangements that those aren't there because then it's really, really shaky and difficult to hover. So I have to keep my head still and hover above things. And then I'm able to click them like how I am sending pictures of this carousel forward and backwards. So I've already seen with this, it's my nemesis, the drop-down menu. So as you can maybe tell, it's a little tricky to hover and then move down, but it's great like this website is where I can move my cursor a bit away and the drop-down stays in place. Because there are so many websites where you have to hover and then scroll down without really changing your location of your head. So I find those really, really challenging. So this one I'm happy to see. You can take your time to hover and then be able to make selections that way.
Awesome. So now that we've gotten to see some assistive technologies in action, just a small collection of, what is really a broad realm of technology that over 1 billion people rely on, different assistive technologies. We now want to shift our concentration over to how the way that we conduct research today limits our ability to engage people with disabilities. And so, for example, if we think about a Think Aloud study that we've gotten quite used to asking users to describe their experience as they go through it, and it's effective because it is quite flexible to the individual. It's cheap in many ways, but for certain folks, it can be particularly challenging. Sam, prior to working with Fable, you participated in a huge amount of research across the board, and I'm curious about how you felt those first times, but also just kind of where did your thoughts on this evolve to when it came to being a screen reader user and being asked to think out loud while going through a flow?
Yeah, I think it's those former research participant experiences that I had, as well as the feedback from Alvar, our founder, and from yourself that helped me shape the way that we do research today at Fable. Because the trouble with a Think Aloud study is that for a screen reader user, the screen reader is speaking and is voicing the web page. And if I'm talking at the same time as the screen reader, that can very quickly become just incomprehensible and impossible to follow for the researcher. But it can also place a very high cognitive load on me because I'm trying to listen to what my screen reader is saying, and I'm also trying to talk at the same time. And it gets even more difficult, for example, for a user of voice control because they need to dictate to their computer and they need to give the computer instructions about, where to move the mouse and what to click on, etc., which is all talking. And so it can get very confusing for them and a high cognitive load to make sure that the researcher is hearing the think aloud part of things and that the computer is getting the commands it needs and not sort of getting extraneous things that are part of think aloud. And so it can be very difficult, and even for someone like Carolyn, who we just saw in the video, who needs to be very careful about the orientation of her head as she uses the head mouse, talking at the same time as you are actively performing a task, just because assistive technologies need so much attention and are so lean forward, can be a lot more challenging than you might expect, both for the participant and for the understanding of the researcher.
I think it's an easy example to point to about just how something that works effectively in some cases can have unexpected consequences in others. And in this case, we're talking about folks using assistive tech. This kind of carries in a lot of common research methods, and if we think about the popularization of usability labs and being able to bring folks into a space to conduct research with them, one of the biggest things that I think has to be called out about this is that it's really prioritizing the convenience of the researcher and of the digital team conducting the research. And in the context of people with disabilities, the real on-site usability lab cannot be a great experience sometimes. Sam, do you want to maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. I'd love to. I mean, first of all, if you are a person with a disability, travel can be an incredible challenge. If you are someone who uses a wheelchair, you may need to make special travel arrangements. I know some cities that have accessible paratransit services can sometimes require you to book trips up to 2 and 3 weeks in advance just to make sure that you get the pickup and the arrival destination that you need. And then, of course, when you do travel to a usability lab, it's a matter of figuring out, is that space accessible? Is it easy to get to? Is it a comfortable space to be in and to operate in? And of course, sometimes figuring out all of that stuff, just how to get there and back successfully, winds up taking a lot more time than the actual, 45-minute research session or however long it may be. And that really limits the ability of different different users to participate in your research. First of all, because they all have to be very close to you in order to get there. But second of all, because it's just not going to be realistic for a lot of folks to spend that amount of time and effort planning out the travel and figuring out how they're going to get there and figuring out whether the space is accessible and trying to do all of that organization and administration. But even when you do get there, you're now in an unfamiliar environment that is not similar to the real environment that you might otherwise work in. And you're using technology that may not be familiar to you, or if it is familiar to you, is not configured in the way that you expect. Most assistive technology is extremely configurable. And I would say I don't know any user of any assistive technology who uses it with the settings that it came with out of the box. Folks spend years customizing things to meet our exact needs. And so when I go into a usability lab and the screen reader has been installed, it usually just has the out-of-the-box settings, which have no similarity to the way that I have things set up. And if I want to have an experience that's even close to what my normal experience would be, I've now got to spend 20 minutes just, getting the basic voice and settings correct in the way that I want them. And unfortunately, all too often, it's happened that I will get to a research lab, and because the researcher is unfamiliar with assistive technology or, not a dependent on it in the way that I am, the assistive technology will be misconfigured or improperly installed or broken in some way that it isn't working as expected, and the researchers haven't realized that there's even a problem simply because they're not experts, and maintaining this kind of assistive technology isn't what they do.
I think one of the interesting things that also comes up with that is like what is the interpretation then? And we sometimes have folks like observe a demo of an assistive technology user, and then they think like, oh my God, that's so hard. There can be a very easy misinterpretation of what is the experience I'm observing if we're putting folks into an unfamiliar technology configuration and then observing them thinking that that's good data.
Yeah, exactly. It can be as simple as all of the work that I do for business here and even for my home life. I insist on having a really good keyboard, because that feedback when I press a key, having that really great feedback just gives me a 2x speed factor because I have an excellent keyboard. And so, you set me down in front of maybe a computer that has a French keyboard, or that has a laptop that has, a very different key configuration than what I'm used to. And even that can just, trend your data away from what my real world experience might be if I was using my own technology.
I love that you snuck away to brag about your sweet keyboard there, Sam.
Oh of course.
We're going to jump now into the system usability stuff. So, commonly referred to as a quick and dirty, but a tool to measure usability, or perceived usability rather. 10 questions, ranging from, strongly disagree to strongly agree. And the questions have this alternating kind of feel to it, kind of like a positive, then a negative, then a positive, then a negative, which really helps with acceptance bias. Good for a wide range of kind of sizes of groups that you're doing research with, and then there's this huge amount of normative data out there, so that you can get a sense of what percentile are you in when you're getting a score out of this. But naturally, it has a couple downsides when it comes to engaging people with disabilities, and we think this is one that was ripe for adaptation to help it better consider the use of assistive technology. So, for example, one of the questions in the system usability scale, or one of the phrases rather that you either agree or disagree to, says, I think that I would need the support of a technical person to be able to use this system. And Sam, what's your response to kind of a question like that?
Yeah, that's always a question whenever it came up in research that I participated in previously that felt a little bit strange to me, because I am a technical person. I'm the kind of person that has had a Linux server in my basement for the last 15 years and has administered servers on other people's behalf. I've done a little bit of programming. I've done some development, and I have never had my ability to use a website. I've never encountered a barrier that would be solved if only there was someone more technical than me around. What I need is someone who has some vision, because the screen reader, for whatever reason, isn't working with the website. And so when I get a question like this, it has no bearing on what my actual need would be or what the barrier is that I'm actually facing and how I would overcome it.
Appreciate that context, and you are most certainly a more technical person than I, so I totally vouch for that.
And yet sometimes I just need you to do a thing for me because it's not working.
It's exactly that. When we think about another one of these questions here, I would imagine that most people would learn to use this system very quickly.
Exactly. I mean, the first thing that comes into my mind is who are most people? Is this question asking me to imagine what a fully sighted non-assistive technology user would have as an experience using this website? Or is it asking most people who are like me and use my assistive technology with my expertise level? Or is it asking most people who use any assistive technology? It's just a very unclear thing from my point of view. And so when you get the answers back, it's the intention behind the answers can be very unclear. And if I decided to try and judge most people, as in most non-assistive technology users would find it easy, would learn to use the system, what does that judgment for me even mean, if that's how I interpret the question?
You know what, Sam? Like, I think this question has, I don't think it's only assistive technology users that have difficulty with a question that references most people. I really do think that is a leap for anyone to be able to respond to. And although it works and is effective, I think as we progress in our awareness of how diverse our communities and populations and users ultimately are, this question becomes, I think, less and less helpful for a lot of folks.
Exactly. What does this mean if you're doing research with the elderly population, for example?
Exactly. Yeah. Or children. Exactly. It just goes across all bases. Third question here is a little bit of focus. I needed to learn a lot of things before I could get going with this system.
I mean, that's another one of these questions that is difficult to interpret. I mean, I needed to learn a lot of things simply to use my assistive technology. And there are some systems that when I use it for the first time, I need to really examine the interface and learn about it and learn the intentions behind it. And then the second, third, and fourth time I use it is really, really fast and easy because I've taken that first session to familiarize myself with whatever I'm using. And then there are some interfaces that are just, every time I use it, I can't remember how it works, and I've got to really look through it and dig through it and figure it out each time because it doesn't behave according to my expectations. And so I'm always having to readjust and oh yeah, you have to, space won't work on that button, only enter, and you have to constantly be figuring these things out. But so, like, what part of that experience is this question getting at?
Yeah, exactly that. Now, John Brook is the researcher who created the system usability scale. It was done back in the 80s, and he advocated himself that if there isn't a relevant questionnaire for your situation, devise one. And that's what Fable took it upon ourselves to do. We basically said, this is our experiment to improve the system usability scale, and let's adapt something specifically for assistive technology users. So we didn't change everything. We stuck with the 10-item questionnaire. We stuck with the exact same scoring structure and back and forth of positive, negative questions. And we also made it available for free, which we felt was an important step to also, get a sense for is this going to be impactful for researchers and anybody really who wanted to have more inclusive data. And so here are a few examples of how we modified the system usability scale. So when we think about that phrase of, I would need the support of a technical person to be able to use that system, we reframed that to, would need the support of another person to use all the features. We replaced the word system with whether it's a website or an app, so it's a bit more specific to the use case that a user is using. I would imagine that most people would learn to use the system very quickly. Change to, I would imagine that most people with my assistive technology would learn to use this website quickly, just a bit more focused. And even in the term of learning a lot of things to familiarizing myself before I could use it effectively. So minor adjustments, but quite meaningful ones in the context of collecting data from assistive technology users. And we haven't yet hit the number, but we're inching our way up to 1,000 responses on this survey across the board. And we are finding some really interesting and meaningful potential benchmarks. Screen reader users scoring in the mid 50s, magnification users scoring closer to the SUS benchmark of 68, up in the mid to high 60s, and alternative navigation users scoring in the low 60s. Sam, when you first started kind of seeing this data, and as we started getting more and more data and consistently showing that screen reader users are scoring the lowest across the three kind of broad assistive technology types that we've defined, just were you surprised?
I mean, my very first reaction was, yes, surprise. And I think part of that goes into you set expectations based on the experiences that you have. And it's something that we've noticed, and that I'm sure whenever you've conducted research, and as well, Abid, you've noticed it, that screen reader users, we tend to have consistently lower expectations of how well things are going to work and how convenient experiences are going to be in the first place. And so sometimes I need to, when I'm involved in research and as my position here as an accessibility evangelist, just step back a little bit and realize that just because it's the regular experience for me doesn't mean that that's necessarily how it should be. And when I stepped back and started thinking about it a little bit harder, the results made a lot of sense, because the screen reader, I think, is the assistive technology that's doing the most sort of interpretation and adaptation and work on behalf of a user, because the screen reader has to read everything on the web page. There has to be keys to jump from heading to heading, like we saw in that demo video, in order to give me that browsing and skimming experience. But there also has to be enough feedback so that when I'm doing something on a web page, I know what I'm supposed to do, what data I'm supposed to enter. When I submit a form, I'm getting feedback so that I know what error happened. And all of that has to be sort of thought out and planned, whereas for screen magnification and alternative navigation, they may be interacting differently, but they are still processing information visually. So I think it's slightly less of a leap there, just because of the fact that historically most designers work exclusively visually, and most of the kind of design plans in the world are made visually, that for those who still process information visually, they're going to have a better experience.
I think you bring up something that's really interesting when you kind of started going down that path, though, which was, what was the source of your surprise? And you kind of mentioned this idea that expectations are or have traditionally been really low. That kind of like, as the web became more graphic over the course of the last 20 years, that folks who relied on screen readers started to expect things to be bad. Do you think this is changing? Do you think this is in part a moment where screen reader users are now also expecting for better user experiences as the world progresses towards kind of a improved accessibility standards and more standardization?
Absolutely. I think it's changing for a few reasons. The first reason is, I think, because there are a few companies that are really leading the way and being at the front of the accessibility vanguard and creating sort of fully integrated accessibility experiences and giving people a taste of what's really possible if accessibility is included in design from the beginning. I'd put, I think, maybe the iPhone and Android smartphones as good examples of this, where a screen reader is built in out of the box, and the built-in apps have been designed with thought towards accessibility. And so for the first time, users started to see, wow, this is what it should be like everywhere and all the time. And this is where we can get if we start with involving folks with disabilities early in the design, and if we start building accessible foundations. And whereas the web historically wasn't that, right? Accessibility was something that was tacked on after the fact. And so I think as companies take the lead, we all realize that, wow, our expectations have been falling, and it's helping to reset what we expect. And another thing that's happening is, as the population gets older and more people begin to experience disability and to lose eyesight, they're saying, well, this isn't the experience I had before I started using assistive technology. I want experiences to be as good as I'm used to having. And so there's a lot of sort of, I think, pressure coming from that side of things as well.
I think you're right. I think there's some of these wow experiences, and even the wow is probably like, I don't know if I'm giving too much credit, but I don't think I am, because they're leading, and you have these experiences like the when you're setting up a Sonos speaker, and if you're using a screen reader, and you're about to do that kind of sound evaluation, so it can equalize the sound for a room, that it notifies a screen reader user that, hey, for the next 30 seconds, you're not going to hear your screen reader. That level of communication is, setting a new standard. And so I think it's an exciting time when a group of users start expecting more. And I think it's a huge opportunity for researchers, designers, and just digital teams across the table to step up to kind of growing demands for what I think is a fun challenge and a good pursuit when it comes to building products. As we close off here, folks, this presentation is intended to be an invitation. We would love to see the accessible usability skill leveraged. We'd love to see it criticized. We'd love to see an open debate around the effectiveness of it and how it helps evaluate the perceived usability of assistive technology users. So we invite you to participate. As we mentioned, it is available for free, and we're always eager to hear from you as well. And our emails are on screen right now. A huge thank you from me. Sam, any closing notes on your end?
Absolutely. Accessibility is an ongoing discussion and an ongoing journey that we're all going on. It's not just a one and done. No part of the accessibility process and journey is like that. And so I would love to continue the discussion and the conversation with any of you who are interested, because this is one step, and there are many more steps to come. And we at Fable are so incredibly pleased to be on this journey and to be able to present this step in the journey to all of you today.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the conference. Bye-bye.
AliCamp 2021.